Hello everyone, welcome to my video about the immune response. In this video I'm going to be talking about what our body does to protect our body from bad things like bacteria or viruses. We call them foreign invaders, or pathogens are the fancy names. So we're going to be going through that information. There's a whole page you guys can use to write this down. At the top of the page there's just blank space for you guys to write down a few things before we go through the table at the bottom of the page that goes through steps 1 to 7 of the actual immune response. So we're going to start at the very top of that page talking about the difference between these two words, which I'm going to be using throughout the video. So an antibody is a Y-shaped protein. This Y-shaped protein is created by a white blood cell, and what it does is it goes to a pathogen or a foreign invader and it kind of tasers it, so stops it from moving so that another type of white blood cell can actually destroy it. And then an antigen is a marker on the surface of a cell. You have them on your cells, bacteria have them, viruses, basically everything has it on their cells, and our white blood cells can use it to determine whether or not it's supposed to be in your body or not. So if it's your cell markers, they'll recognize it as your own body cell, but if it's a different marker on the cell, they know that it's not supposed to be there. So it will create antibodies in order to fight against that foreign invader that has different antigens than we do. Now I use a trick to remember the difference between these two words because gens kind of sounds like genes, and genes are something that we wear on the outside of our body, just like antigens are something that the cells wear on the outside of the cell membrane. So I use that as a trick to remember this information. Okay, this is what these things look like. So these antigens are just different shaped markers. Every single cell will have different shapes. And then when we create antibodies, they'll have binding sites that have a similar shape to the antigen. Okay, so like this shape is a triangle. We have triangle binding sites. This shape is kind of a square with a little square on the end of it. And you see the same binding sites on the antibodies. So these Y-shaped proteins are antibodies, and the antigens are just these markers on the outside of the cells. So I'm going to go through a list of the white blood cells that we're going to be talking about in the table below, just so you guys have the list in written format, and then also you can see pictures of what they look like. So starting when we talked about white blood cells, we went through a few different kinds of white blood cells. Lymphocytes were one of the categories. We know what they look like underneath the microscope slide. In the video, we're going to be talking about them as B cells. So lymphocytes are the ones that actually create these antibodies, which are those Y-shaped proteins that we use to kind of fight the bad guys. We also talked about monocytes, which I'm going to be referring to as macrophages, or macrophages, depending on how you want to say it, which are used to engulf and destroy the foreign invader. Okay, I think of these as being like the Jabba the Hutt of the immune system. They basically are just like, bleh, and eat everything in sight, which is good for this response because they're going to eat all the bad guys and you don't have to worry about having them in your body anymore. There's something called a helper T cell, which is used to kind of make a mold of the antigen marker so that eventually it can tell the B cell what it looks like. Suppressor T cell is going to be at the very end telling those macrophages to stop eating because they basically just eat everything in sight. Okay, they literally won't stop eating until they're told to do so. So the suppressor T cell, once we've actually engulfed all of the foreign invaders, the macrophage has to be told to stop eating, otherwise it will literally start eating our own body cells, which we don't want to happen. And then of course we want to remember the foreign invader so that next time we see it, if we come across it again, our body cannot get sick again. Our body would notice that foreign invader and it would fight off that foreign invader faster. So maybe you do end up getting sick, but maybe just for a shorter period of time because it doesn't have to go through that process of finding the right antigen. It already knows the antigen and it can quickly make the proper antibody that fits with the right antigen. And then the last one, which we're not going to be showing in the diagram, but in some cases, depending on the cell that we're dealing with, so if you have old cells or mutated cells or cells that are cancerous, we have a white blood cell that's called a killer T cell, which basically pokes the membrane, like slitting the throat of the membrane, and just everything oozes out and it kills the cell. So in some circumstances, it's not going to go through this whole immune response cycle. It's going to just basically get killed by a killer T cell, which is not part of the drawing that I'm going to be doing. So if we have something bad that we're exposing our body to, so a virus, a bacteria, something that we don't want in our body, okay, these are like the guys in those war movies that are lined up at the very front of the army, and they have all those shields kind of pressed together so that the opposing army, when they try to get through, they're going to hit these shields. And they usually also have these little pokey sticks. Okay, I don't know the technical term, but the pokey little sticks kind of between the shields so that when the opposing army kind of just like runs towards them, a lot of them get picked off against these shields and get speared with those pokey little sticks. So this is going to be in your body, the shield that's protecting your body against these bad guys. So basically all the time. So for example, our skin. Okay, obviously our skin is a whole layer on the outside of our body that's impenetrable unless you have a cut or you get stabbed or something. You're not going to be able to get through that if you're a bacteria. You're not going to just be able to absorb through the skin. You have things when you eat, for example, and sometimes there's bacteria on your food, like stomach acid, that could kill bacteria, make you not get sick, like food poisoning. Things if they get on the inside of your nose. You have snot in your nose that's going to protect your nose from that bacteria. You don't want to have it be able to go into your nose, down your pharynx, okay, eventually into your lungs or your esophagus. Also, nose hairs in your nose catching the bacteria. If you, for example, had bacteria or something getting into your trachea or your bronchioles, your bronchi, you'd be coughing to get all that bad stuff out. Okay, on the inside of our ears, we produce from the sweat glands of our ears earwax. If we have anything bad getting into our ears, earwax is going to kind of catch those bad things and make sure it doesn't get on to the inside of our ear, causing an ear infection, which we know are not fun. And then things getting into our eye, we produce tears, which again get rid of those bad things so that we can prevent our body from getting sick. Okay, sometimes this doesn't work, so let's say you get a sliver, okay, or a cut. You have to have a second line of defense. They've gone through this first line of defense, so this would be like the guys with the swords that are right behind the guys that have all those shields and those pokey sticks. So in our body, this acts as, okay, something's got through our first line of defense, so I'm going to just basically send a bunch of fluid to the area, and it's hopefully going to drown the bacteria or the viruses, which sometimes work. It presents itself as swelling in our body. So if you get a little bit of a cut, okay, sometimes you'll see a little bit of red and swelling kind of around the area. Okay, so this cut is not infected, it's healing, which is good, but the body has sent a bunch of fluid to this cut to make sure that any bacteria that might have got in to the cut was first made, that it's basically drowned. So our immune system doesn't have to work on this area unless bacteria have gotten in and didn't drown when we tried this process. So let's say our first line of defense and our second line of defense still did not prevent the bacteria or the virus from getting into our body. Okay, we would go through the actual immune response at that point. So step one is that foreign invader has gone through the first and second line defense and entered our body and is about to make us very, very sick. Okay, what our body is going to do in response, so step two, is we take one of those really big macrophages and we engulf that foreign invader, which has a very angry face because it's just about to wreak some serious havoc on our body if this didn't get engulfed. Now, the foreign invaders are more difficult than you would think. Now, we can engulf parts of them, but these little antigen markers get pushed to the outside, not only because the macrophage can't fight it all by itself, but also because if they're on the inside, then all of the other white blood cells won't be able to see what shape they are, so they won't be able to make the proper antibody for the antigen. So it engulfs the part of the foreign invader, it sends the antigens to the outside so that another white blood cell can come in and kind of help that macrophage out. Okay, it can't quite fight this guy on its own. It's calling for backup. So backup comes in, this is our helper T cell, and it's basically like Play-Doh. It presses against the antigen and makes a mold of it, and then it can go to the B cell and tell the B cell to make antibodies. Okay, notice that we have on the last slide triangular antigens. Now we're making antibodies, those Y-shaped proteins that have the proper structure, which are triangles. So our helper T cell is telling our B cell to create these. As they're created, they're going to plop off and they're going to travel back to that macrophage that's struggling to fight against the foreign invader, and we're going to use those antibodies to help. So now we see the antibodies kind of attaching to different parts, different antigens, and what it does is it kind of tasers it and it kind of just shocks it a little bit so that it's stunned for a second and it's not able to move. Okay, once it's not able to move, then the macrophage is able to engulf all of them, and we have now basically destroyed that foreign invader. So because we're done destroying the foreign invader, the last thing that we have to do is stop the response using the suppressor T cell, and then we have to use the memory T cell just to make a copy of that antigen. It puts it in like the memory filing cabinets that your white blood cells have, and that means that if I ever come across the same antigen, I know exactly what antibody to create, and it will take me way less time to fight off this bad guy. So that is all of the immune response. You do have to draw out the pictures. I recommend using colors. This is a really, really important diagram, so I'd put a big star beside it because it is incredibly important. And I would draw it out a couple times so you guys know it really well. Okay, so have a wonderful evening. If you have any questions, please ask. But if not, I will see you all tomorrow in class, and have a wonderful evening.